Association football is by far the most popular sport on earth. From Dagenham to Damascus, there is no corner of civilization that football hasn't touched. If it were a religion, it would be followed by more people than Islam or Christianity. If it were a nation, it would be larger than India or China, and if it were a single corporation, it would join Apple, Microsoft and Amazon as the only publicly traded companies with a market capitalization in excess of $1 trillion. Football is the most played sport on earth in terms of professionals, registered participants, and recreational players. It is the most watched sport in terms of both live and TV audiences, and it is the most lucrative sport when it comes to worldwide TV deals, transfer fees, wages, and merchandising. What's more, no other sports even come close. Cricket is the next most played and watched sport, but its worldwide audience is still dwarfed by football. The American sports, like American football and basketball, are extremely lucrative in the United States and have been exported with some success to the rest of the world, but nowhere near to the extent of football. Whether it be in the searing desert heat of Djibouti in East Africa to near glacial parts of northern Norway, football enjoys enormous popularity in both rich and poor countries, in both East and West, and in countries led by both authoritarian right-wing leaders or communist dictators. It doesn't seem to make any difference. Football's popularity is enduring, and whilst many of the reasons for that may seem obvious, some are a little more nuanced. So in today's video, we take a look at why football has enjoyed such lasting and indeed ever-growing popularity throughout virtually the entire globe, and the slight anomaly of the countries where it isn't the most popular sport. To understand football's popularity, we must first understand where it began and how it spread. Whilst you can trace the origins of football back to the Second Imperial Dynasty in China, ancient Greece, or Britain and Europe during the Middle Ages, football as we now know it emerged in Britain during the early to mid-19th century, initially in independent fee-paying schools, in universities, and famously in the city of Sheffield. The rise of football in Britain coincided with the height of the British Empire between the early 1800s and the early 1900s, when Britain was the world's foremost global power. At its largest, Britain had colonised just shy of a third of the world's landmass and population, and alongside Christianity and rampant homophobia, Britain quickly set about exporting its sports across the globe. The sport spread rapidly, beyond just the British Empire. From Glaswegian schoolteachers in Buenos Aires to miners and shipyard workers from Portsmouth, Southampton and Sunderland in Bilbao, Britain's growing migrant workforce quickly began spreading the sport throughout the French, Spanish and Portuguese-speaking world as well. To give you some idea of how rapidly football spread, there were official sports clubs set up that played some variant of association football in the likes of Switzerland, Uruguay, the Netherlands and the United States before the Football League had even come into existence in England in 1888. Whilst the size and influence of the British Empire during football's formative years no doubt goes some way towards explaining its early growth, it's also worth pointing out that football's primary explosions in popularity occurred in the Spanish and Portuguese colonies of South America and in other European countries like Switzerland, Denmark and the Netherlands. Meanwhile, it did not take off in quite the same way in British colonies like India, Australia and New Zealand, or the former colony of the United States, so clearly there is more to this story than empire alone. What's more, for the majority of the 100 years in which Britannia really did rule the waves, football wasn't actually Britain's most popular sport, since rugby and cricket preceded football, and the game dreamt up by Etonians and popularised by northern working classes had some catching up to do. It is the subject of class and socioeconomics that we must explore next, since it is undoubtedly one of the key reasons for football's almost unanimous appeal. Although codified football as we know it was created by the ruling classes, the reason they were so rapidly beaten at their own game was because there are very few barriers to entry when it comes to playing football. Whilst other sports require costly equipment or at least a suitable surface, football can be played anywhere with virtually any number of people and using anything. You do not even need an actual football in order to play football, since so many items can be turned into a rudimentary, vaguely spherical object capable of being kicked about. Despite the fact that his father was a footballer, Brazilian legend Pelé grew up too poor to buy an actual football. Instead, he learned to play football on the streets of Bauru, Sao Paulo, using either a sock that he and his friends would stuff with newspaper as a ball, or simply a grapefruit. Legend has it that when Pelé joined Santos as a 15-year-old and was allowed to play with a proper ball, he found everything so easy because he had already mastered playing the game with an ersatz ball that had been much more difficult to manipulate. Within 2 years, he was Brazil's top scorer as the nation won their first World Cup in Sweden. Sadio Mane tells a similar tale of growing up in poverty in Senegal and learning to play the game with a grapefruit. Over 50 years separates Mane and Pelé in terms of age, but they are united by a love of the game that meant a lack of money wasn't going to stop them from becoming masters of their craft. There are a few other sports where this is so emphatically the case. It's not just the ball, all you need is two objects or a piece of chalk and a wall to magic up a goal, and you can also play football with a very large number of people, right down to a one-on-one game. You just have to adjust your pitch size accordingly, wherever and whatever your playing arena may be. You can even hone your skills playing football on your own, doing keepy-uppies to improve your technique, hitting the ball against a wall to work on your passing, shooting and first touch, or even more inventively, using a hard surface to work on not just your striking of the ball, but also your goalkeeping ability, as many of you will have seen a young boy doing here in the UK in a clip that went viral at the start of lockdown. The fact that football can be played on just about any surface, short of molten lava or water, in any weather, with any number of people, using almost any object as a ball and as a goal, means that there are very few people on Earth who could not play at least a rudimentary form of football. I mean, just compare that to a sport like golf or motor racing and polo as even more extreme examples, when the majority of the world's population, and certainly the majority of the world's children, simply cannot afford to compete. Even a sport like cricket requires greater investment and equipment than football, which can be as free as the air in which we all breathe, and it's comparable on that front in terms of other sports perhaps only to unprotected bare-knuckle boxing or wrestling, which are rather more dangerous of course. There's another advantage that football has over other sports when it comes to accessibility, and that is its simplicity. I was forced to play rugby for what seemed like 47 years when I was at school, and I'm pretty sure I still didn't know all of the rules by the time I left. Don't pass the ball forwards and make sure to kick it away before some daft rhino clatters into you. That was about the extent of my knowledge, although I must admit I do enjoy watching the sport more now that I'm no longer subjected to forced participation. American football appears to be even more confusing. It doesn't matter how many Super Bowls I watch, or those NFL highlight shows that used to and may still come on after Match of the Day 2, I still have virtually no idea what's going on. As far as I can tell, the main rule is that a single piece of gameplay cannot last more than 30 seconds, you have to have 57 ad breaks, and at halftime Katy Perry and Coldplay perform for about twice the length of the actual action in the game itself. Anyhow, the point being, whilst other sports perhaps require more complex understanding, and whilst there are obviously many laws to the game of football, the basic premise is remarkably simple. Put the round thing in the goal, without using your hands. I know it's a basic premise that Christian Benteke has forgotten over the last few years, but it's pretty simple nonetheless. I have an 18-month-old nephew who is just learning to talk, and he can't say alpha yet, but when he sees me he just shouts ball, because when my mum brings him round to my house, I just kick a ball at him in the earliest preparations for him becoming a full England international, who spearheads the whole City attack upon our glorious return to the Premier League and European football. He might not yet fully understand the offside law, like most football fans, but he already gets the idea that he is supposed to kick the ball in a certain direction. In essence, he is already learning to play football. Now try getting an 18-month-old toddler to organise a scrum or navigate the Singapore Grand Prix in an F1 car. No, actually don't do either of those things, especially not the second one. It would be extremely dangerous, and I'm fairly sure it would be illegal in some capacity regardless. The point being, to play football, say in a school playground or in a local playing fields, you need very little actual knowledge of football, and even the so-called complexities, whether it be, say, what constitutes a back pass or the offside law, they really aren't that complicated to explain, and are fairly second nature to pick up just whilst playing the sport. So football is cheap, accessible, and easy to understand. But you could say the same of all the track and field sports, and yet they don't quite captivate the world on a weekly basis like football, or enjoy the same kind of passionate and dedicated support from billions of people across the globe. One of the reasons for football's enduring support among supporters is surely the fact that in cities and countries where football takes hold of a population, it often comes to have a greater cultural and societal meaning and significance than just the football itself. The majority of football rivalries, for example, are not born solely out of locality or competitiveness, although I would say that is the primary reason here in England. Whether it's in Glasgow, Bogota or Jerusalem, there is more to the rivalries in those cities than the battle between the 22 players who take to the pitch. There may be religious or political differences, or most commonly of all, some kind of class struggle, with one team viewed as being the club of the wealthy or ruling class, and another seen as the side that represents the poor and working class communities. There are actual football fans, if you can call them that, who don't really like football. I've met people who are huge Hull City or Sheffield Wednesday fans, for example, that might follow their teams home and away, investing a significant portion of their time and wealth into supporting their club, but won't watch any football outside of their own teams. There are people who will say, I'm a Newcastle, Penarol, Orlando Pirates fan, or whatever team it might be, but not a football fan. These people have brought into the sport at a purely emotive and community-based level. I'm not sure that you get those types of people in any other sport, although I don't know any other sport to the extent to which I know about football, so I'm happy to be educated if that is the case in any other sport. Clearly, I should add, that is a serious minority of football fans. Most people who attend football matches and play football are incredibly passionate about the sport, as you would expect, and that brings us to a rather obvious but nonetheless worthwhile point. Football is extremely enjoyable to an enormous number of people. It wouldn't matter if the British Empire had forced people to play under threat of the whip, and every citizen of Earth was issued with a free ball and an instructions manual, if football wasn't thrilling and fulfilling both to witness and participate in to a vast number of people, it wouldn't enjoy the success that it has done for so many years. Once people have caught the football bug, whether it be through a relative when they're as young as my nephew, or whether they're a first generation fan in their family that doesn't come to the sport until they're in their 30s or 40s, once it has got you in its grips, very few people can wriggle free. In addition to the sport's early success at grassroots level, it was also much better managed in the professional ranks and is still the most successfully marketed sport on the planet right now. Although it took almost 7 decades following the creation of the Football Association, football's first governing body, before we had the first World Cup, the FIFA World Cup, still preceded the creation of worldwide tournaments for virtually any other team sport. Inspired by the success of football at the Summer Olympics, the first FIFA World Cup took place in Uruguay in 1930, 8 years before the first Baseball World Cup, known as the Amateur World Series, 20 years before the first Basketball World Cup, 24 years before the first Rugby League World Cup, 45 years before the first Cricket World Cup, and 57 years before the first Rugby Union World Cup. What's more, if you look at the participants in those respective World Cups, football was far more representative than any other sports. Whilst the first Baseball World Cup, or Amateur World Series, was competed solely by the United States and the United Kingdom, and the first Rugby League World Cup was made up of only 4 nations, France, Great Britain, Australia and New Zealand, there were 13 teams from 3 different continents at the inaugural FIFA World Cup in 1930, which had grown to 16 teams from 4 different continents by 1934, and eventually up to the 32 teams that we see today, with every confederation having fierce battles for qualification. It was an early trend, but one which has continued throughout the years. There are a grand total of 223 official federation-affiliated national football teams on Earth, 211 of which are fully FIFA-affiliated. Compare that to Rugby Union, where there are 119 official national teams, 101 of which are fully affiliated with World Rugby, and Cricket, where there are 104 official national teams, made up of just 12 full members and 92 associate teams, and you can see how the wider demographic of football has persevered throughout the years. So why then, given football's popularity across virtually the entire world, are the world's most populous countries seemingly among the least interested in the sport? Of the 5 most populous nations on Earth, including China and India, which are home to 36% of the world's population alone, football is only the most popular sport in, at best, one of them. In China, India, the United States of America and Pakistan, football takes 2nd, 3rd, 4th or even 5th place behind a myriad of other sports, although it's telling that there is no unanimity among those nations as to a preferred sport. In China, sports like running, badminton and table tennis enjoy immense popularity. In India and Pakistan, cricket has long reigned supreme, and the most popular sport in the United States normally comes down to a debate between American football and baseball. The reasons for this are different in the cases of each country, but what's important to note is that the popularity of a sport is often self-perpetuating. Take India for example, where cricket enjoys immense popularity. It isn't actually an ancient tradition that cricket has been by far India's most popular sport. It is a shift which occurred largely in 1983 when India shocked the world by winning the Cricket World Cup, recording famous victories against Australia, England and the West Indies in the final. From that moment on, everything changed. India's government decided to place more focus and funding on cricket than any other sport since they had evidence that they could become a force within it. the success, had led to a wave of interest in the sport among the wider population, suddenly children had celebrities, idols and role models in cricket in a way in which they didn't in football and other sports, and businessman and cricket administrator Jagmohan Dalmia sensed an opportunity to market cricket in a way in which other sports hadn't been marketed in the country before. Essentially, India experienced a landmark moment in cricket and the nation capitalised upon it. Had India won or even progressed far in a FIFA World Cup before that, the nation's sporting landscape may look very different now. If any of you would be interested, I think a video looking particularly at those three nations, India, China and the United States, and which one, if any, would be most likely to become a force within international football in the future, could be quite an interesting video. So let me know your thoughts on that idea in the comments. Also, a lot of people have suggested moving video ideas away from the comment section and over to a new setting like the community tab or Reddit, so I'm currently mulling that over and would appreciate any suggestions. I think once I go down to 5 or 6 videos a week, I could do a community post on the day in which I don't upload each week, everyone could leave their suggestions, and then I get a clear idea of which were the most popular by virtue of the number of likes. Let me know if you think that'd be a good idea, since I know many of you would prefer more genuine discussion about the video itself in the comments section. Anyhow, thank you all as ever for tuning in, it is greatly appreciated, and if you enjoyed the video or found it remotely informative, please do hit the like button, subscribe to HITC Sevens, and feel free to follow me on either Twitter or Instagram, where the username is simply @HITC Sevens on both platforms.